or close to Christmas, I think. After I was arrested, I saw my mother and father. And then I saw my mother and father and my sister when the day of Neil's death.
Were you ever allowed legal representation or allowed to have your legal representative visit you when you were at the cells?
No.
Was not allowed?
No. That was part of, you were kept in complete isolation.
At the time of Dr. Aggett's inquest, it's correct that you were in prison at the time.
Yes, I was awaiting trial.
Right, so you were never subpoenaed to give evidence at the inquest? Do you know who was you were subsequently convicted of treason and sentenced to, what was the exact number of years?
I was convicted of being a member of a banned organization and of treason. And I got 10 years for treason and 4 years for being a member of a banned organization. And they were to run concurrently.
The treason trial itself, where was it heard, ma'am?
Yeah, at Johannesburg High Court. Yes.
The judge that presided over the matter, do you recall the name?
It was Justice Henk van Dijk.
And the prosecutor?
Mr. Swanepoel, he was the Deputy Attorney General. He was the same Swanepoel who interviewed Aggett when he laid his charges.
The same Swanepoel who did what?
Who interviewed Aggett van Heerden when he was one of the detainees who laid charges.
You testified that Dr. Jacobson attempted, or he intervened and he contacted Pretoria. Would this be Pretoria Head Office Compol?
Well, I don't know what the Security Police Head Office was called, but it was Security Police Head Office.
In all the time that you were in custody, did you ever receive anyone from Compol or Head Office or anybody from the security branch to say, Dr. Jacobson has laid a complaint, you are the complainant, can we get a statement from you? Were you ever approached?
No.
The magistrate's visits that you mentioned from Mr. Killian in particular, do you know the purpose of the magistrate's visiting detainees? Did you know?
I wasn't too clear on that. I was aware that there was some prescription arising, I think, out of the circumstances of Stephen Biko's death. I'm not sure. That there should be regular visits from a magistrate and from an inspector of detainees.
Did it strike you as odd that there's a magistrate? He wouldn't be charged with taking your statement, but he could have asked a policeman to take your statement.
Look, I was actually angry because he was using an excuse of saying, no, this took place in Joburg. I can't take statements there. I just felt that he was abrogating his responsibility.
Did you think it was a flimsy excuse to be used?
A flimsy excuse, yes.
This Van Aswegen, Johan Van Aswegen, does it ring a bell?
You know, it's just, I'm sorry, it's just one of the blanks that I've got.
That's fine. Would you say that Lieutenant Whitehead in particular, asking all these weird questions about Dr. Floyd and Dr. Aggett, did it border on obsession, according to you?
It was almost obsessive. It was like, yeah. Let me just give an example of contrast in behavior. At one stage, Lieutenant Nordi, who was from the Eastern Cape, was sitting in an interrogation, not really listening to it. He was reading a report that had come obviously from some intelligence sources about some happenings in the trade union movement. And he burst out laughing and he said, oh my goodness, this woman was sent as a courier to Botswana to pick up money for this union. And she catches a train, and by the time she gets to Cape Town, there's no money left there. And he thought it was a huge joke, you know. Yes. He wasn't sort of like getting all obsessive and creepy. He he understood the tone of politics of that time.
Right.
Whereas with Whitehead, it was like someone who was a voyeur. You just got the sense that he was... I can't explain it more, that he was a voyeur in the lives of Neil and Liz.
You say during the interrogation, your interrogators wanted you to force things about people that were not, or force you to say things about people that were not true. Would this be done in the form of a statement, or
Yes.
what?
They would want it in a statement.
At any time when you were being interrogated, when you were expected to submit a statement, were you ever expected to type a statement?
They confiscated 2 typewriters from my home when they arrested me. And yes, I think I was typing up on those typewriters.
Would you be allowed to type in yourself or in the office? Where would these typewriters be kept?
In the office.
Where the interrogators were. So they also had access to the typewriters when you were not in the office. Would I be correct?
Oh yes, they took over those typewriters that they had confiscated. They took them over and then they used it for their own work, and they only returned one after my trial.
In the criminal case that was registered against Jetlif and Prince, let me just ask you, let me start it like this. Before we go to the criminal trial itself, when they introduced themselves to you, did you have any reason to believe that the people that were introducing themselves as Jetlifs or Prince or whoever were not the people that they were? Did you have any reason to believe otherwise?
Not with Detlefs and Prince, but there were occasions when someone would put a name forward, but you would hear them being called by another name.
By the fellow interrogators?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to find out, in your criminal matter that you registered against the 2 police officers, Jetlif and Prince, so the doctor testified, and despite the medical evidence, the policemen were acquitted.
Yes.
Who was the prosecutor in that matter?
I don't know.
Magistrate, can you remember?
No.
Your last sighting of Dr. Aggett, when he raised his hand, did he have handcuffs? Was he in handcuffs? Can you recall?
He might have been... No, his hands weren't handcuffed. He might have been handcuffed, but I can't remember. Because a lot of the men detainees, a lot of the time, were manacled on their legs.
When you were taken for interrogation on the 10th floor, can you remember which office it was? Or in whose office it was?
I was interrogated in several offices. I know I was interrogated in Captain Struvik's office. But there were many offices that I was taken back and forwards to.
When you were taken to the offices, how did you go to the offices? I understand you would have walked, but how would you have gone there?
The white security policewoman would come and fetch me from my cells and take me up, I think it was by lift, up to the 10th floor.
In most of your interrogations, was the interrogator the same person? Or would there be different interrogators?
Different interrogators. There were some that were more consistent, such as Detlefs and Prince. But there would be, like the 2 policemen who came from the Eastern Cape. They came in for a while and then they moved off. Major Arbery came in, interrogated me, and then moved off. Strivik interrogated me, but then moved off. Okay. And Conrad too.
The 3 days that you were kept upstairs, were you allowed to change? You were allowed to change your clothes, or did you remain in the clothing that you were in?
My family was allowed to send in clothes once a week, and I was allowed to send out my clothes to be washed.
Okay, so how would this change of clothes occur? Did you keep it in your cell?
What would happen is my family would bring my clothes and hand it over to Sergeant Jabir, and then he would, I don't know if it was him, or if it would be handed over to the woman security policeman, be handed over to whatever, and given to me.
But it was, okay, would they be given to you? What items were you allowed to keep in your cell? Can you recall?
Very little. I was allowed to have some things, non-perishable foods, so like biscuits or those kinds of things. Not a lot. I was allowed to have the clothes that they sent in.
Okay.
I wasn't allowed to have shoes with shoelaces, and I wasn't allowed shoelaces. I wasn't allowed a belt. They were very specific about that. I wasn't allowed to keep my medication in the cell.
Can I just ask, when you say they were very specific, was this written down, that this is what you are allowed not to?
When I was first arrested, I was made to take my shoelaces off from my shoes.
Okay.
And I know I had belts for my denims, and that was also taken. And that was standard for everyone, it seemed.
Can I just ask you, I know it's none of my business, but I just wanted to ask you, do you smoke?
No.
You never smoked, okay. The cells in particular, can you recall the cell visits that were made? Maybe perhaps what time it was, who would visit, what hours, duration, things like that? Do you recall?
I don't recall cell visits.
Okay.
On a regular basis at all.
Okay.
I know that it appears to have happened, but I don't recall people. I do. On occasions, yes, that's right. On occasions there were cell, but it wasn't like every hour or something like that. I do recall two cell visits, yes. The only time I really saw people was when they bought food.
Okay. Evenings, would they, if you can recall, in the evenings, the cell visits, early parts of the morning, would they rouse you up, wake you up?
No, so they could well have come with me not being, with me being asleep. They could have done this. But they didn't wake me up.
Okay. Would they be able to see that you were asleep? Were the doors open? Were they probably locked and some left ajar? Can you comment?
There obviously were the two doors, security door and the other door. I can't remember now.
That's fine.
But I think they would have been there was a small window from the passageway,
Yes.
as I recall, that you could also look through.
Okay.
As I recall, I could be wrong. I could be confusing it with prison.
Okay. A watch. Were you allowed to keep a watch on you?
No.
You mentioned that you didn't clean your cells. Who cleaned your cells at John Foster Square? Can you recall?
They weren't cleaned.
They were not clean at all. And you were not made to
On
clean?
one occasion, the passageways were cleaned, but my cell was not clean. And on one occasion, there was, I remember, a woman in charge of some prisoners who came in and cleaned.
Your cell, you were just alone in the cell, or were you always alone in the cell? Did anybody apply, to the best of your knowledge, for amnesty on the assaults that took place on you?
No, they
No.
didn't.
If we can just have a moment. Well, during the process of you being interrogated in the offices by when your interrogators were present, was anybody else allowed to enter the room?
Yes. it was sort of, people wandered in and out of each other's offices all the time.
Nothing further to this witness, Melo?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Melo. Mrs. Hogan, I recognize that this is not easy for you to rehash these incidents 38 years later. I appear on behalf of Nick Dietlefs and Rolf Venter.
Rolf Venter?
Yes. It might not be involving you, I'm not sure.
No.
If I may ask, first of all, in relation to what you observed in the security branch with the officers and the other members of the security branch. Obviously, you do know the ranking system as it was the police of officers, commissioned officers and non-commissioned officers. What was your observation about the hierarchy of the pecking order, if I might say so, in the security branch?
If I have to compare it to the only way in which I can compare it to the prison correctional services, which was then run along the same rankings, sergeant, whatever, it was completely different from how the prison service operated. Prison service operated with a strict ranking, strict, issuing of instructions and who was responsible for what. And in the security police, it was not that evident, that kind of strict ranking and behaviors.
Still, you refer to Conrad to be called Hitler by some of his
staff,
members,
yes.
by some of his staff?
Yes. Some of the staff used to grumble about him and said he's mad. Also be aware that it was around this time that, as I've said before, the Nationalist Party split into Conservatives and the Nationalist Party. So there were tensions amongst themselves during that period. After my assault, one of the security policemen came to me and said, "How can these guys go and assault you?" He was never involved in my thing. And he was sort of intimating, that this was all unnecessary. Why did they have to do that? So they were undermining each other. And some of it seemed to be politically driven.
Now, obviously, 38 years memory is not necessarily as it was 38 years ago. There are certain aspects you will refer to, at least one aspect by Mr. Barney, where you referred to Dietlefs being there, whilst in the statement you said he wasn't there. If I may ask you, your statements, these two statements that are before that served before the first inquest, would you consider that to be a more accurate recount as to what happened?
I don't know that they served at the inquest or were they statements that I made. I'm not sure that they served at the inquest.
Well, they are as exhibits. They were given to us as exhibits to the inquest.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether the magistrate, but they were
Yes,
apparently
yes.
presented as exhibits in the inquest.
Those were fresh in... When I gave the statement to my lawyers, because it was to my lawyers that I gave the statement, not to the prosecuting authorities, it would have been with events fresh in my memory.
So can I just perhaps conclude to say in this regard that is the more accurate version based on memory as it happened there and then short couple of months
Accurate
after?
as against what other version?
For example, you referred to Mr. Dietlefs being there, whilst in your statement you said he wasn't there.
Which part of the statement?
Well, that is, you were referred to that by Mr. Barney.
Sorry.
And I don't
So the signed statement or the signed one?
It is on an instance. I may go through that.
Perhaps I can assist my colleague. I know Mr. Couture could possibly be referring to paragraphs 18 and paragraphs 19 of the unsigned statement. That's Exhibit B 3.1.3. And to be clear, in paragraph 18, Mr. Deercliff's is not mentioned, but he does appear in paragraph 19 a bit later in those proceedings.
It is the 15th of November. For example, you refer in paragraph 18 to the 15th of November. You don't refer then to Deercliff's.
Paragraph 18 of the unsigned?
The unsigned one, yes.
Okay, yes, right.
Then you refer to people being involved in your interrogation. You do not mention Mr. Deercliff's. Well, in 19 you mention Mr. Deercliff's. But
Now, what it is if you read it carefully, on paragraph 18, I say the next day, Sunday the 15th of November, Major Arbery, whatever, arrived at my cell. They took me to an office in Vereeniging and subjected me to the most intensive interrogation. Then I say, in 19, I say the interrogation started at noon on that day. So I say they took me from my cell on the 15th. These are the people who took me. And then I say I was interrogated in 3-hour shifts. And at the bottom, I talk about Deercliff's being in one of those shifts.
in one of those shifts.
Yeah.
Correct. Now,
that, they change their shifts all the time.
Maybe I misunderstood that there.
Yeah.
But you, in essence, state that these statements that you made, the unsigned one and the signed one, was when the whole idea was still fresh in your memory. Everything that happened was obviously fresh in your memory, and you written a complete statement for purposes for which your attorneys requested the statement.
I would say that it was as accurate as I could remember at the time. Remember, I was in quite severe post-traumatic stress at that time.
Understand. If I can ask, in relation to the goods in your cell, you've testified.
The goods in my cell.
Yes, the goods that you had in your cell. How many sets of clothing would you have, for example, in your cell?
How many sets
of clothing? How many shirts? I don't know whether you were dresses or what was the clothes that you had.
You have in her cell.
In a cell.
I don't specifically remember during my period of interrogation clothes being in the cell per se. There might have been a jersey or something. Because I would be taken to shower, and that would be the occasion when I would change from my pajamas into clothes. So, as I remember, and I can't be definitive, but as I remember, because there's nowhere to hang your clothes, there's no... So I'm surmising that what must happen is close to where the showers were, your clothes were hung up, and then you took what you needed for the day.
But you were allowed, for example, to have a gown with you.
Yes.
And you had playing cards at some stage.
At some stage they allowed playing cards.
And what else? What of these?
It was food.
Non-perishable, like cookies and biscuits.
Yeah. There was no basin or anything in the cell. What was it? And I didn't have to... it's some time ago. Let me just say there was very little in the cell. I wasn't allowed books for a very long time until Christmas. And they would not allow me, the doctor prescribed medication. They would not allow me to have that medication in the cell. I had to take it before I went into the cell. They used to strip my cell. Sure, that constable, what was her name, Wallenberg or whatever it was, she used to strip my cell regularly. So that's all I can remember at this stage. I spent the bulk of my time up on the 10th floor. The whole day I was up on the 10th floor. Every day, even over weekends. So I spent very little time in my cell during that period.
And obviously you have testified about the fact that you wanted to commit suicide and that you in fact tried to commit suicide. In your life prior to this, did you ever think that you would commit suicide?
No.
And did you inform, for example, your interrogators and or any other police officer at the cells and or the security branch that you tried to commit suicide or that you are contemplating committing suicide?
Not at that point. But after Neil Aggett's death, I was still effectively in solitary in Heidelberg. And I started to have severe nightmares, really bad insomnia. I cried a lot. They took me to a doctor who was an army doctor who was extremely hostile and screamed at me. They thought I had a lump on my breast. I'd had a small operation in relation to that. And I just had no contact with anyone after Neil died, apart from my family, and it was my family on the birthday. So after 2 months, I was really cracking up. I was not able to sleep at all. So I called in this. I know Struvik came to see me and he started shouting at me. But after 2 months, I kind of cracked up and I called in the police and I said, "You remove everything from the cell because I will kill myself." Which they then did, and then the next day I was taken to Clarksdorp police station.
Now, at John Foster Square, where you were held there during the time of your interrogation, did any of the personnel, either uniformed personnel or security branch members, ask you whether you have complaints?
Not a security branch. I don't remember someone coming around asking if I had complaints in the morning, klachten of versoeke. I don't remember that. I only remember that happening, that incidence of someone coming to a cell and asking if you had klachten of versoeke at the Heidelberg police station.
If I can just translate, klachten and versoeke means when you've got complaints or requests.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so I only recall that strongly in my memory, that happening at Heidelberg. And that was the uniform police, not the security police.
Was the involvement of Whitehead in your interrogation, was Dietlef's present at that stage?
I don't remember that.
I see on the close command, sorry, my handwriting's so bad. The close comrades list, that there is some entries. For example, Maurice is written later on, that the name is written as if you clarified certain issues.
That's not my handwriting.
Is that not your handwriting?
No.
So all the alterations that is on that.
That was done by somebody else.
Okay.
It's not my handwriting. In fact, the little notes at the bottom here, on the second page, is also not my handwriting.
You mean where's written people who I know fairly well? Another one.
Yes.
Who wrote that?
I don't know. If ever the original document could be found, we'd have it.
Were you confronted with this document? Did they put the document before you and then ask you questions about it?
Yes.
And can you remember that there was that entries already or not?
I can't remember them.
The charges that you laid against Mr. Prince and Judith, was that after that charges were laid, you were not assaulted again?
No, I was assaulted again.
Why? You were assaulted again?
Well, I laid charges after both sets of assault. I was assaulted in October and then again in November, and then I laid charges after that.
Yes. So you once laid charges about both instances of assault.
Yeah.
So when it went to court on the charge sheet, they set out the charges on both these instances, and that was what they were charged with both the assaults.
I can't even remember meeting with the prosecuting authority. I might have, but I was just woken up one morning in prison and told I was going to court. And I said, "What for?" And they said, "This is the assault case." The Adjutant Haysaman had me woken up, and I was just told I'm going to court.
Were you at that stage awaiting trial, or were you still?
I was awaiting trial.
And you gave your evidence, and the doctor gave his evidence.
I never stayed for the doctor's evidence. I simply gave my evidence and I came back.
So you were not there then when the doctor testified?
No.
And Dietlefs and Prince were acquitted on all charges.
Dietlefs also entered into, as an exhibit, at that assault case, a document which was drawn up by activists giving guidance on what your rights were as a detainee and how to handle detention. And he said that was in my possession when I was arrested. That was not in my possession when I was arrested. And it later transpired that that document had been drawn up after I had been arrested, but it was falsely handed in by Dietlefs as a document which I had had in my possession.
Who arrested you?
Major Conrad, Warrant Officer Marks, and I can't remember the others. I think it was 4 people.
But Dietlefs was not there
No.
that you arrested.
And all the documents that were taken, virtually each and every one of them was signed by Warrant Officer Marks with the date. This document didn't have that.
and I can tell you my instructions from the detectives is that he denied that he ever physically assaulted you or threatened you with any physical violence. That is my instructions from him. You take note of that.
He's not telling the truth. Why would I have instituted charges against him if it was not true?
Mrs. Hogan, I understand from your evidence as well in relation to the bed that was placed into your cell that at some stages privileges were given to detainees. Did you also understand that?
Yes, it was, now you would have a bed, then it would be taken away. Then they'd give you the bed back, then it'd be taken away.
And do you know whether some of the detainees were allowed more privileges or different privileges?
I wasn't aware of the circumstances in which other detainees were being kept. And might I say, I don't think there were privileges.
No, I don't mean anything. This is not privileges, but they were
having a bed to sleep on is not a privilege.
Yes, but they were allowing people to have stuff, and sometimes they take them away, the stuff that they allowed people.
Well, I can't speak for them. I just know that they allowed playing cards and a Rubik's Cube, and then they took it away.
Yes. Do you remember the dates of your interrogation? The date specifically? When did it stop, if I may ask? When did your
It was around, you weren't allowed access to watches or anything. I was picked up on the 22nd of September, and it was towards mid-November that the intensive interrogation stopped. I was taken down to the Eastern Cape, and the interrogation continued there. But there it was fairly mild because I was just finalizing my statement.
Is it also that your observation that, and I think that is almost your evidence as well, that certain of the interrogators had different styles in interrogating than others? For example, Nadir, you referred to Nadir, which clearly had a different style from Cronwright, for example, or from Whitehead. Did they each have their own specific method that they used to interrogate?
I think they switched between persona all the time. There were some that were just consistently, overtly aggressive, like Prince. A person like Deercliff's would just sort of sit there and say to you, "So what haven't you told me?" He didn't kind of use, but at times he'd get aggressive, but he wouldn't be consistently aggressive like
Prince.
Yeah. A person like Nadir was just looking for information. It wasn't, you almost got in the sense that he was an intelligence operative rather than a security policeman. He wasn't trying to build up a case. But he could also get aggressive when he wanted to. And of course, Struvich was always aggressive. And Detlef would be vindictive. He was nasty in many little ways.
Mrs. Hogan, at that stage, and just to also put it correctly, there was some organizations were banned, and that was the legislation of the day. Without justifying it, and please don't consider that I'm trying to justify any of the actions. What was your impressions? Were the policemen that dealt with you trying to fulfill a mandate? In other words, trying to counter communism, for example, or to investigate was that the purpose of this interrogation? It was not just a haphazard, let's make life difficult for Mrs. Hogan.
The purpose of the interrogation was to get a statement. That's what you are detained for. And that was what the law said, that they can detain you until you have made a statement. And that statement has to be to their liking. For me, it was very difficult to understand what they approved of, because they had documents before them which outlined my work in the ANC. Now, I can understand that they have arrested someone who, of her own admission, by the documents that they've intercepted, is a member of the ANC. What I've never been able to understand is why they then surmised that anybody that I had anything of was a member of the ANC, and why they were trying to force me to say that these people were members of the ANC when I had no idea, and I'd never engaged with any of them as members of the ANC. And so my impression was, yes, they were doing, the ANC was a banned organization, you're a policeman, you do what you should be doing. But my impression was that torture was part of the standard procedures of what happened on the 10th floor at John Vorster Square and other police stations. When I was in East London, I consistently heard people screaming under interrogation. And so, yes, they were trying to do their work, but the way that they had elected to do their work was to torture people. And I said that as much to Prince and Detlefs at one stage. I said, you are not detectives. You just try and force information out of people. Why don't you go and do your detective work? Look at this, look at that, and see what information is there and what is relevant and what is not relevant. And they said to me, you don't understand how things operate. We don't have the time for that. So, my sense was very much they were investigating, but they were using torture to do their investigations. And they were making assumptions and trying to force statements and admissions out of people that those would not no person would have admitted to.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Lord. I've got no further questions.
Lord, just a few questions on the examination. Ms. Hogan, the question put to you on cell visits, to my mind, the term cell visits could be something of a misnomer, because we've also heard evidence that these cell visits, sometimes referred to as patrols, didn't necessarily mean opening up the cell doors. It also included simply looking through the peepholes to see what was going on inside. And if the patrols involved at times looking through peepholes, am I right in saying that you wouldn't necessarily have known that would be happening?
Yes, that does clarify. There is a difference between patrols and the official cell visit where you get asked about klagte and versoeke. I don't remember Klachten and Versuche, but I do remember occasions when people were looking through to see what was happening. I remember one occasion, they always left the lights on, so I couldn't sleep at night in the cells. So I then went under the bed and put the blanket over the bed, over the sides, the thing, so I could sleep. And they came around and they couldn't see me in the cell. So they had to come and open the cell to find me. So yes, they did peep at you to see where you were. Yeah.
Thank you. Quite a few questions were put to you on your positions.
I don't sit the bottom.
Yes. They got such a shock. What the donut?
It would have been quite a thing if you had that. Some questions were put to you on what you were allowed to keep in your cell and what you were not allowed to. And you have answered those questions. I'm not going to revisit them. But do you recall ever having to go to a room in the reception area where some of the belongings were kept?
Yes, that I do recall. That's right. Yes.
Sometimes it's been referred to as the property room.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And also the clothes that I wanted washed were taken to that property room. Yes.
And when you were perhaps going to showers, to shower and what have you, you might have to go to the property room beforehand to collect things?
I don't, you know, I would like to assist on this, but I really don't have a clear memory of where I got my clean clothes from. There was nowhere to hang them in the cell. Maybe I told the security policeman woman and they fetched it, what I wanted. I really don't remember.
Do you recall if they let you keep a towel in your cell?
Yes, they did.
We're not allowed to keep towels in the cell. So
Look, the evidence so far is that the men were not allowed to keep the towels in their cell.
Yes,
we're not allowed to keep a towel in the
I
cell.
was allowed to keep a towel. I remember that specifically. Because I used it, I specifically asked for it. It was a very huge one. Because the mattresses were so filthy, I used to sleep on top of the towel.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned in the criminal case against Dietlefs and Prince that Dietlefs had put up as an exhibit a document that in fact had been drawn up after your arrest. And you've described the document as a document that was something of a guide as what to do in detention. Do you recall, I'm assuming that you did get to study the document.
I never saw it.
Oh, you never saw it? Okay. So you wouldn't know if the document recommended the laying of charges against police officers who assaulted detainees.
My stepmother, on her visit, when I saw my father, my stepmother, for the first time, immediately sat down and said to me, "Barbara, do you know what your rights are? And you can lay complaints." So that is how I knew that.
And my learned friend for Mr. Dietlefs and Mr. Fenter asked you whether your view was that these police officers were simply enforcing laws as they existed at the time, that banned communism and outlawed the ANC. And I think you have adequately answered that question. My question to you is, did tough laws warrant tough treatment?
Tough laws required the law to be followed. Torture was illegal. In my case, if one ever had to do an academic exercise, I would argue that the final charges that came before the court were very similar to the information that they had had before them when I was arrested. So I don't know why I was put through all of the other stuff, simply for that.
And in your view, even if a law was particularly tough and pernicious, there was no reason to act unlawfully in order to enforce that law.
This was always my great concern, is that the security police were not operating on a basis of information or an intelligent an assessment of the value of the information that they had before you. They were quite determined to, it appeared to me, to get admissions about ANC-related activities, about being linked, people being linked to a banned organization. I think one must also bear in mind at the time, with the greatest respect to them, that many of them were very, very racist and believed that what they were doing was for the folk, and that they were almost like indoctrinated, or not indoctrinated, but willingly believed that what they were doing was they were protecting South Africa from rooi gevaar and swart gevaar. You know, the communist threat and the black people, black insurrection. And that seemed to be the driving force of what shaped their, and because they were antagonistic towards us. It wasn't that they simply saw us people who had transgressed the law. They saw us as people who were evil. People who were trying to, who were opposing the apartheid state. They saw us as their enemy. And I think that shaped the whole terrain in which we operated.
Two questions. You say that there was a day when Neil entered the police station and waved, and you saw that his shirt was torn. Where exactly did you see him? Was it on the ground floor, the charge office, or what?
No, it wasn't in the charge office. I'm not very au fait with John Foster, but they were busy administering my discharge from John Foster Square. So it was an office where they sign you in and you pick up your, the property. So it was in that office, and he came, I was this side and he came in from that side.
It must have been on the second floor.
I don't even remember if I was, I'm sorry.
We do have a floor plan of the second floor where there's indication about 3 offices where there was an office for the magistrate and the doctor, and then there's an office next door to the doctor where they used to keep clothing, and then there were uniformed police also there, and that is on the second floor.
Well, that sounds like the place where I was, because that's where I got to my books and where I was being processed.
So was he coming, were they taking him into the cells or out?
He was coming in.
What time was it?
It must have been, because they then took me to the Heidelberg police cells. I don't remember the time. It could have been any time. I can't say for definite. It wasn't early morning. And it wasn't late afternoon, so it's any time after, I would say 9 to about 3, 4, I'm not sure.
And this should have been somewhere around December of 1980.
It was in January.
Was it in January?
Yes. I was moved, I think, on the 4th or the 5th of January.
Now, you then told us that on the day when Nick Dietlefs and I don't know, I can't remember who else fetched you from Heidelberg, you were sitting in their vehicle and you saw a poster on a newspaper truck. Could you remember what date that poster had? Did you have time to look at that?
The date?
Yeah.
No, I don't remember. It was the morning of the 5th, when Neil died. I think. No. Because I know that when Neil's death became so there must have been time that had passed before that furore to have occurred.
The tennis death was furore.
I think it was a
Was it a star?
I think it was a Star Randall man, I'm not sure.
Was the Randall mill grand already by that time? I thought the Randall mill had been grand by 1977.
Okay.
I may be wrong.
Yeah, I can't remember. It might have been a Star, but it was English speaking.
And you were then driven to John Purpose from that day. Did anybody tell you, either the two police officers who were with you, anybody else when you arrived at the police station, what caused this death?
No. No one told me. Dietlefs would not confirm who had died. He just said it's someone you're close to. And my sister was not allowed to say how he died. My sister was not allowed to say anything after she said, "Do you know what's happened to you?"
You said she must keep quiet.
She was?
Did you tell her to keep quiet?
She must keep quiet.
But when did you come to know how
You know,
that happened?
as I recall, it was after that they allowed me a radio. And I must have then heard that because it then became a major news thing, I must have heard on the radio.
What was announced? What did you hear? What
That
did
he
you say?
died in detention, I'm not sure.
You never mentioned her name?
I don't know.
When you were held at John Foster Square, you did not know in which cell Neil was kept. Was held.
The women were kept in a separate part from the men, in a separate section.
So there was never a time when you would walk past them or
No,
never?
we were kept completely separate.
Thank you. Any questions arising from that?
No question, but just a point of clarification. The Randall Mill was in existence at that time,
In 1982.
1982. It did close in some controversial circumstances in 1985. Its parent company decided to close the newspaper down.
It was not part of the group that was banned in 1977.
No, that was Sunday World.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, thank you very much.
None, my lord.
Ms. Owen, thank you very much for the information, and we hope that we'll be able to read your book at some stage.
You sound like my late husband. Every day he'd say, "When's your book coming?" Thank you, my lord.
Is that it for the day? You are excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My lord, we have no further witnesses for today.
I'll then continue tomorrow at 9:30.
As a corporate.
Very well, then. Thank you very much. Have a hot action until tomorrow.
The thing is, I'm gonna use it.
I need one like